when I did the research for my book, Return to the Sacred, and I teased out these 12 universal, predominant spiritual practices, one that caught a lot of people's attention was what I called the path of sacred sound. And at first people would say, that's not a path. What do you mean, sacred sound? And they're thinking, well, that's not a religion. And how is sound a vehicle? And yet, when I ask people to stop and think about when they feel an experience of the sacred or how they encounter the sacred, they start to realize that some of their most powerful moments involve music. In fact, most of us, when we need to uplift our spirits, we go to music. When we want to be inspired, we go to music. We can even communicate with people of other cultures through music, and we don't even understand their language. And yet there is something in the energy, in the vibration of sound that transcends language or culture. Now, in my experience facilitating ceremonies and studying with cultural teachers from other traditions, for example, Native American traditions, one thing that has commonly been taught that I've come to even experience myself is that we can speak a prayer or we can sing a prayer. And what many of those healers and teachers told me is that a prayer that is sung carries a greater power. And you might think of it even in scientific terms, because ultimately sound is just vibration. It's just moving energy. And so when we move into song, when we move into the intentional use of sound, we are actually crafting that vibration. We are actually trying to match that vibration to the feeling inside. And so now we are moving the feeling of the sacred from within to the world outside us. And that's why when a choir sings and the people are really singing from their heart, it doesn't matter what tradition it is, you feel it. Sometimes you even weep. When you join in a song or you sing along, whether it's a popular music song from your childhood or whether it's a spiritual song from another culture that you've just encountered, when you feel the sincerity of that community or your own heart engaging that music, there is a kind of an opening. It's an opening of the heart, and I actually believe it's also a transformation of the physical. It's a shifting of the energy body that allows the heart-mind connection. The experience of sound actually features very prominently in the writings of the world's mystical teachers and the world's mystical traditions. Even from personal experience, I can say that there are experiences of the divine that are very visual. And maybe that's when our eyes are open and we're walking, looking at the world, and we see the beauty in nature or people, or even on a busy street. And we feel a kind of soundtrack. We see a kind of symphony and orchestration that's going on behind it. But there are other spiritual experiences, many of which happen with our eyes closed. And maybe we're in a meditation, maybe we're in the middle of a practice, or maybe it comes on spontaneously. And what happens as we move through some of these other experiences is that they can move beyond form. Sometimes in the inner world we experience lights and colors. We start to experience the divine matrix of the world. And very often what starts to show up next is that all the images start to fade. Color and form fades, and yet sound remains. In many of the world's traditions, we talk about a sacred vibration, the music of the spheres, the voice of God, the hum of the earth. There's this kind of resonance that starts to come through as we move deeper and deeper into states of consciousness, sometimes until only sound remains. And then we slip into the silence, which is ultimately the birthplace of all sound. I was touched very deeply when I was in Australia, and I was able to spend a little time with some traditional healers from the Aboriginal traditions there. And they talked about how, in their worldview, the very origin of life itself came through song. That everything was sung into being, that there were song lines literally spread out around the world, and that we were living songs ourselves. We were the songs of the Creator. That I am a song, that you are a song. The challenge, of course, for the modern mind is, what does that really mean? Is that a metaphor? The fascinating thing is, as poetic as it sounds, and as emotionally real as it sounds, science is starting to come to similar conclusions. The finer the tools of observation we have, the more we realize that resonance, vibration, the movement of energy is really all that's going on. In fact, through the eyes of physics, you might say that life is nothing but an orchestra of energy. And each person, each being has its own energy signature, or you might say its own song. And ultimately, when it comes to well-being, it's my belief and experience that the secret to mastering stress and imbalance is learning to sing your song. And what that means is that a living spirituality is about being congruent. It's about living with integrity. If I feel that there is a unique gift that I have to bring to the world and I don't bring it forward, that's like containing my song. And we all know the feeling of trying to sing someone else's song. Maybe it's at work or maybe it's in a family, and eventually we feel like we just can't go on because it sucks the life out of us. And so maybe song is not only a metaphor, and so we realize that the gift of sound and music in the spiritual world transcends even the experience of music. It becomes the very metaphor for life itself.